Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope. Hey, welcome to another episode of Cultivate the Ordinary. Today is another episode where I'm going to be flying solo. I'm going to unpack from my own story and then insights around dealing with the grueling disease of dementia. And, but I want to look at it in a way that sees the complexities of it and also the ways that I think there's moments of hope and joy. And even if we look hard enough, small gifts that I think God somehow in his grace, in one of the worst degenerative, destructive diseases, still preserves moments of just beauty and times that we glimpse into the soul and the heart of the person that we loved in profound ways that maybe we wouldn't have even without the illness. And so just want to unpack that some in this episode, because I know when we talk about ordinary and ordinary lives and ordinary things, I mean, this is about as ordinary of a issue in terms of, a really troubling disease that's really afflicting so many of us. In fact, there was an article in Forbes magazine from 2020 titled "Dementia is on the Rise Worldwide. Here's How to Stop It." And I'm quoting, and it says, a new study published in the Lancet Public Health reported that the number of adults aged 40 years and up living with dementia worldwide is expected to nearly triple from an estimated 57 million in 2019 to 153 million in 2050 unless countries address the risk factors. And so, I know there's a lot of complexity around this, even studying the brain. There's just so much. There's still just early frontier. I've said, several times in this podcast that I lost my dad 2 years ago, and he had been battling dementia, for significantly for 4 years, but probably if you go back, it was much, further, earlier, where it was, slowly things were kind of unraveling or progressing. Also, as far as clarity on terms, you hear Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's is more of a degenerative disease, diseases of the brain, the most common cause of dementia. And then dementia is more of an umbrella term for cognitive impairment and decline. So kind of hear those thrown around a lot, and it's kind of confusing around that. But, so if you think of Alzheimer's as sort of the umbrella over various, diseases and disorders, dementia being a very big one, and then dementia also itself just being a term for cognitive impairment. So I laugh at there's a line by the poet W.H. Auden, who once said, "We are all here on earth to help others. What on earth the others are here for, I don't know." And it's kind of a jab at altruism, I think. But what I will say is that, as I even intro this personally in this topic, is that what I can say is that the other, in the sense of my dad, who I was caring for and helping, helped me tremendously. And there were things that even in the most limited aspects of his brain continuing to, degenerate and lose more impairment, that he became someone a teacher for me. And I had a good friend who was helping our family caregive and called Dad, I believe, his kind of a silent counselor. And so we also had another caregiver that who was incredibly inspirational, who would go out with my dad and just push him in his wheelchair, and they would just go sit and look outside and spend time outside together. And the way he cared for him was so beautiful. But he talked about my dad all the way up to the end, where it was like he described his face as sort of having this joy that it was as if God preserved and kept intact some measure of the joy and hope he had found in Jesus. And he kind of wore that, weird to say, as a mask, but he just perpetually had that on his face. And so I guess I'm kind of going all around here as I'm opening into this topic, but basically just that there's so much beauty in the brutalness of this disease. I have to say, so my mother and I, mom and myself, and then of course, my wife and those in our household, we joined together about, maybe it's going on 5, 6 years now, but that really the last 4 years especially, Mom and I did a lot of the care for Dad all the way up to the end. We did have incredible hospice care and some other friends on the care team that helped Dad, that we could never have done it without help. And I will say, looking back in my life, I've done some really hard things. I remember growing up on a grain farm, and man, just shoveling grain in a grain bin that's like 150 degrees, it felt like, and just doing all the field work and farm stuff. And it was just like, that taught me a lot, but it was hard work. Later in my life was a mental health caseworker in St. Louis, working with a population of kids and then later adults for 7 years who had severe mental illness. Incredibly rewarding, like amazing lives, and also extremely hard, a hard job. And then more recently, being a house parent in a children's home for kids who are in foster care, with sometimes as many as 6 to 8 kids in foster care, dealing with some of the most difficult moments of their lives in situations of enormous trauma and coming out of abuse and neglect, and processing their stories and what's going to happen in their future. I mean, you can imagine, just to have six elementary boys in your house anyway, beyond your own kids, but then the kids that are dealing with so many hard things as well altogether. Like, again, incredibly fun, most probably rewarding things I will ever do and have done. Loved it so much. It was also incredibly hard. All that to say, all those things were preparing in a way, I guess you could say, but nothing could have prepared me for how hard it was to take care of my dad. Just from the standpoint of just, I think, the care involved, but, and I also care for my brother Jeremy, who's had a traumatic brain injury. So since, 2009? So, and this still, it was just, I think there was something about dementia that, the sadisticness of the way it sort of slowly keeps taking from the person. And when you're living around that, it's like this agonizing sort of slow death, but you just see more loss keep accumulating daily. So yeah, it was. So for all of you guys out there who, whether it's, you may not be caring for somebody, but if it's a family member that you're watching go downhill, a grandparent, someone that you've loved and they've changed, they don't remember you. Their personality has changed, to where, maybe they were, just an amazing saint or lovely, person that now just cusses like a sailor and, is just treating you awful. And you just know, that's not even them. And how do you come to terms with that? How is that, you're always, I feel like we're always asking questions like how this just isn't, it doesn't, I mean, there's so much in our world that doesn't seem and isn't right, but it's just like, oh man, this thing is so cruel. So, I was kind of in the process of thinking about writing a book on this topic, and it hasn't been written, but I kind of wrote an introduction. And I wanted to read some of that in this episode, because it kind of gives some more thoughts to what my experience of dealing with dementia in my dad's case was, but also hopefully in a way that it is really relatable. And of course, as we all suffer together in similar situations, there's solidarity and understanding and not feeling so alone. So anyway, when I kind of envisioned writing this book, which I haven't done, so it may come to fruition. If not, I guess there was a glimpse of that in this podcast, that what that would have been. But the title I envisioned was called "Stuck in a Seatbelt: The Awful Agony and Hidden Beauty of Dementia." And the stuck in a seatbelt part came to me as I would see my dad, this guy who once could fix anything, solve any mechanical, breakdown of things, just a handyman fixing machinery, whatever it was, could no longer understand the mechanics of unclicking his seatbelt. Like, we'd be in the car and we'd get home and like he was stuck. He was stuck in the seatbelt. He was stuck in the car. He couldn't get out. And if you think about, like, is there anything much simpler than like clicking a button and getting out of a seatbelt? Like cognitive wise, there's not many things you do that are much simpler than that. And so because he couldn't even, like, was not able to do that and was stuck, it became sort of a metaphor of like what dementia in his case did to his brain. Like he's literally stuck in a seatbelt. His brain is stuck. It's seatbelted in. Maybe this car from hell. I mean, and which is interesting because I was also kind of thinking about just the name dementia, and it's interesting to me how close it is to, like, dementia, demon, dementia, DAMN. It almost seems like a more fitting title, dementia. And so, anyway, I wanted to read just a small excerpt from, I guess, what I envisioned in maybe an introduction to this book, but it gives more language to some of what I was feeling as I dealt with my dad, but some of what you may be feeling as well. So here's some of what I said. The monster of dementia has the worst memory loss of all. It cruelly returns every day to rob the same dignity and familiarity it robbed the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, as if it forgot. As awful as it is not been able to rob Dad of recognizing beauty around him. He, and I'm speaking now, this would have been written at the time, but he's often more present in the moment than I am, and his communing with God in the stillness of his own lost vocabulary is a spectacularly beautiful thing. Dementia still has not stolen that sparky smile either. And so I go on to say, it's like for days on end, being around dementia, it's like watching someone who could build or fix anything struggle to grasp how to put on a seatbelt, or be at a complete loss of understanding the mechanics of a click pen. For the caregiver, this in turn creates a moving kaleidoscope of being in shock, laughing at about how absurd it is, feeling anguish for them, and then being angry at the whole thing, and asking how this is even possible. And then out of the blue, something they say is genuinely so funny that it makes you laugh until you cry. And the relationship between laughter going to crying and crying into laughter, as we know, is it's not a big leap there. Okay, continuing on. So it makes you laugh until you cry, tears you need to shed for lots of built up reasons. Horribly cruel as it is, it can help teach patience and compassion like few other things, and slow us way down into a world of childlike curiosity where we uncover old memories together. Those parts are gifts. Looking back, as I was talking about this, I wrote, I feel completely swallowed up by suffering. I'm locked in a war of attrition with my dad's late-stage dementia as we care for him in our house daily. It's relentless. It seems dementia's supply lines are endless, and the reinforcements never run out. They only increase, and I have no strong means of counterattack on the disease. Actually, attrition is probably the wrong word. Dementia is more like a frontal lobe assault on us inside the walls of the Alamo. It's a terrifyingly brutal disease whose prey is the brain, one precious piece at a time. My Alamo walls will eventually be overrun. Dementia's forces are too strong, and they're already making their way up the ladders. But I know I'm not alone in here. My grief and struggles will still be difficult and the road ahead hard. But my tears will not drown me. I'm reminded that as we reach out and commune with God in our suffering, we can know that even our saddest tears will join the tears of Jesus and will make their way into the vast ocean of his living water. It's kind of, it's emotional reading this, but it's also like, it's kind of almost like looking back at a journal that now I'm on the other side of, but it really was, as I was using kind of war terminology in a battle and feeling like that. It really was that. And looking back at that, it's like when you hear, guys writing from front lines, like that's, as I'm reading that now, that's what that felt like. But I just, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying in this episode, as I talk about the battle of dementia and what that was like for me and our family, the days were, like I said, so hard and yet just filled with just moments that like I look at, and I want to do another future episode with someone else, that had gone through the same sort of battle and story and kind of process that together in an episode. But for the sake of this one, just so I'm not really getting into many stories here or anything, but what I will say is, outside from just doing the care, caring for your dad, bathing him, diapers and cleaning and feeding, all those hard things. And, sometimes they're pushing your hands away and, it felt constantly like you're, at times working with someone that's not working with you. And so, you're pushing through that frustration. This is your dad in my case. So there's all this emotion around his loss and why is this happening? And that adds more frustration and anger. And then it's just, somehow, I do believe that in God's grace, even in the hardest of these stories, as we look for him in his presence, he signals back in ways. I never will forget where, this is dad earlier on. So as he's declining, but you're making all these decisions, like taking the car keys away and having to, deal with that. It's like, these are new things and they're new deaths of things. It's not just that, it's the death of my dad no longer driving, not just, and like, that's another loss, or that's, a further, crippling thing or whatever. And just like having to tell him, like, I have to take your keys, Dad, and you can no longer drive. Like, it wrecks you, it just, and, so, it's, all of these things. And I think, as I look back to, like, one of the hard things was, seeing my dad's world shrink, for kind of his protection, to, uh, where he could still walk outside and have some of that freedom. Well, then, he'd end up in the neighbor's woods, or he's lost. And so you have to really be watching, and of course that adds a whole bunch of stress. And then, like in our case, we were able to kind of take that part away and have a fence with a gate and watch him, keep going to the gate to try to get out. And you're just like, it's just crushing to like, we have to do these protective things, but, his world continues to shrink down. And, and then at one point in Dad's story, he fell and broke his hip. And then, that's a whole nother story. But, he eventually then, he was in a wheelchair for his remaining, I guess, a little over a year of life after that. So then it shrunk down to, where a wheelchair could go, his world. And in a lot of cases, it was in his room, or in the house. And so just kind of that, almost this parallel of as his brain is shrinking down and the cognitive decline within the brain, there was like this parallel like shrinking of his world, exterior world, again, for safety and protection, things like that. But it's just the sadness of that continued loss, just getting sucked away. And, but yet despite all these hard things I've laid out, when I talk about the hidden beauty, like there was moments where, I'll never forget, Dad one time earlier on, as before all the significant decline happened, he could still communicate, telling me that he felt so safe with me. And I remember that one line, that gift of that phrase, I feel safe with you. Nothing was as big later in my journey with him when things were, as hard as hell and extremely trying. And so sad that I could cling to that line that I'm safe with you. Dad feels safe with me. That was a gift. And I look at it like, and I think I said this as a memorial, but it was almost as if like dementia was this, we were at sea or something, and dementia was this storm that was going to separate us. So there's sort of a last connection, and then you kind of get separated in this foggy sea. And that's kind of what it felt like then for the remainder of the time, where, he continues to decline and, then eventually loses being able to communicate. Before that, I do remember him saying at one point, he didn't know who I was. That was a death of being a son, being a recognized son. I remember putting that date in my phone of just like, oh my gosh, like that was a death. Like he can't, I'm his son, his firstborn son. He doesn't know who I am. Another loss, so all of these sort of losses. And yet, but just then these glimpses of beauty and humor, you're walking in and, Dad's wearing like a washcloth around his head, and looks, like the pharaoh of the laundromat, like it looks like got the pharaoh going, and look, and you're just like, what are you doing, Dad? And it's like, at one point when he was walking through, or outside stuff, he would sit out in his truck, and we'd parked and let him just have access to, until one day he had access to the keys and took the truck on one final hurrah getaway, which probably took years off all of our lives, and God crazily showed up in that story, and Dad ended up at a person's house miles away, and kind of down a dead end. And this person actually had known someone with dementia and recognized the signs that this guy's lost, and got him to get out of his car. Dad would have likely killed somebody, or who knows what would have happened, but praise God, in that story, Dad was safe and everyone else was safe, and we were able to find him. But again, back to that, like he would go sit in his truck in the evenings, like he was going somewhere, and you'd see him walk out with big loads of socks, and you're just going like, Dad, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm going on a trip. I'm going back to North Dakota. And, and it's like, so if in your mind you're going back and, what you need on your trip is 25 pairs of socks, because apparently that's the most important thing on a road trip to North Dakota. But you look at these things and you have to laugh. I mean, you have to laugh to cope. And they are these genuinely just funny moments. And yet then there were also these times of just his, quiet presence, his smile that was something that he kind of had towards the end, to all the way to the end of his life. That, when I was with him or you'd be around him, just simply that smile, that was all that was left. But it was the greatest gift he had to offer, and I believe it was a divine gift, that his face was radiating sort of a joy. It sort of was a anchoring of his own faith, that probably spoke louder than words in a lot of cases. And so, and seeing him enthralled, just looking out at the sunset at night, outside or whatever, if he was sitting out on a bench or something, like things that I've lost that wonder that it seemed that he had. Dementia couldn't take that. It couldn't, take away, the call or the, still the ability to see beauty. And, that was teaching to me to slow down and to kind of be still and look at the things that in my speed and hurriedness and stuff I'm missing. So just, I don't know, like it for me, I mean, everyone's stories are different, journey's different. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything about, the brutality of dealing with dementia. But I guess, I hope that in God's grace, wherever you are with this, how close you are or distant, that there will be gifts in it that you can see, and that, maybe a moment of clarity happens from your loved one that comes out, and you can just embrace that, some moment that takes you back to the past, you laugh about, or you lock eyes in a way that, just can even supersede talking sometimes. And so, and that, yeah, if you are the one doing the caregiving, I mean, oh man, I mean, this is one of the hardest things ever. And so, hopefully having others to help, support you, to be there. And at some point without, this was us and my mom and a care team, and it was that hard. So I think for most people, there comes a time where probably, it's just too much to maybe care the whole way at home, if that was the plan. And there's no shame in that. I mean, we have to be able to take care of ourselves. Because there's plenty of stories where, the caregivers are the ones that end up, dying first. So, all of this to say, just that, I guess I wanted to touch on this topic, in a way, at least just myself, to share a little bit of my observations and just kind of my experiences with it, and trying to, within the cruelty of this disease, navigate and try to cope and also see the beauty on days when it feels like everything else is being lost and gone, and feeling God's presence near you, and praying to him for him to break through, maybe not unexpected ways. I do want to hit this topic in the future. Like I said, I think so many people are really wrestling with it, dealing with it. There's so much complexity and pain around it. And so what I want to do is, if you've listened to this episode and there's anything you want to reach out to me about, ask me about, maybe it's something I can pray for you about with it. Maybe it's, I don't even know. Or if, you want another episode about this, more information, resources or something, reach out. I'm going to put my email, in the show notes. And so I want you to do that, and that would be awesome. So this is an incredibly, I've said it a lot. It's one of the most cruel diseases there are, and it robs and it takes away. And we need each other, with ones like this to just be there and be support and, help teach what maybe any insights we've gained, or any ways we can reframe certain things, or help each other see, maybe in different ways, too, some of the things that we're dealing with. So I hope you have an awesome day wherever you are. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.